The question appeared on every screen simultaneously, glowing in cold blue letters. Identify the threat in this room. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a normal academy exam. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'd been training at the Interstellar Defense Academy for 3 years, preparing for the moment when humanity would need protectors who could recognize danger from 1,000 different worlds. I glanced around the examination hall, my heart already racing. 50 cadets sat in their assigned seats, tension thick enough to taste. Protocol said we had 20 minutes to observe, analyze, and submit our answer. Get it right, graduate with honors. Get it wrong, and your career in Xena defense ends before it begins. I forced myself to breathe slowly, scanning faces and body language like they'd taught us. Row 1, row 2, then my eyes landed on row 3. That's where I saw her. She sat 4 seats from the left, perfectly still, in a way that seemed almost unnatural. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders in waves of silver that caught the light like starshine, and even from where I sat, I could see the slight point to her ears, the only feature that marked her as non-human. She wore a fitted tactical jacket in deep navy, professional and practical, over dark pants that suggested someone ready for action. Her face could have been sculpted from porcelain, delicate and hauntingly beautiful, with eyes that seemed to hold galaxies. I'd seen her around campus before. Arya, that's what she called herself. One of only 3 alien students in our class, part of the integration program meant to build trust between species. She'd always been quiet, keeping to herself, excelling in every simulation, but never boasting about it. Now she sat completely motionless, staring straight ahead at her blank screen, not even pretending to look around like the rest of us. My tactical mind kicked in. The exam said identify the threat, singular. Around me, I could hear the whisper of styluses on screens as other cadets began writing their answers. I noticed most eyes kept drifting back to row 3, back to Arya. It made sense, didn't it? An alien among humans, in a facility designed to protect Earth from extraterrestrial dangers. The obvious answer, maybe too obvious. I watched her more carefully, noting the way her fingers rested gently on her desk. No tension, no nervousness. Her breathing was calm, rhythmic. If she was a threat, she was either incredibly well-trained or she wasn't the threat at all. A chill ran down my spine as the thought crystallized. What if that was the test? What if they wanted to see who would jump to the xenophobic conclusion? I shifted my attention, forcing myself to really look at everyone else. In row 5, a cadet named Torres kept glancing at the exit, his jaw clenched tight. Nervous? Or planning something? 2 rows behind me, Cadet Reeves had her hand near her pocket, fingers twitching. My instructor's voice echoed in my memory. Real threats don't always look dangerous. Sometimes they look exactly like you. 10 minutes had passed. The pressure mounted. I could feel sweat beginning to form on my palms. Around the room, more than 30 cadets had already submitted their answers. I caught a few exchanging glances, small nods toward row 3. They'd made their choice. They'd picked Arya. I felt sick. Then something happened that changed everything. Arya's eyes moved, just slightly, just for a second. They flicked toward the observation window at the back of the room, the one where our proctors watched from behind one-way glass. And in that brief moment, I saw something in her expression. Not malice, fear, pure, crystalline fear. My blood turned to ice. I spun in my seat as casually as I could manage, pretending to stretch. Through the observation window's reflection in the polished wall panel, I caught movement. Someone was in that observation room who shouldn't be there. The normal proctors wore academy gray. This figure wore black, combat black, and they were attaching something to the room's environmental controls. Oh God, I whispered. This wasn't an exam about identifying which student was dangerous. This was an exam to see if we could identify an actual active threat. And that threat wasn't sitting in a desk. It was in the walls. I looked back at Arya. She was still staring forward, but her hands had moved to grip the edges of her desk, knuckles pale. She knew. She'd known from the beginning. That's why she hadn't been looking around, she'd been listening. What had she heard that we'd missed? I closed my eyes, filtering out the visual noise, focusing only on sound. The hum of the screens, the scratch of styluses, breathing, whispers. And they're so faint I dismissed it as building noise, a high-pitched whine coming from the ventilation system. A whine that was slowly, gradually getting higher. 5 minutes left. My mind raced through scenarios. If I was wrong, if I stood up and caused a scene during the exam, I'd be expelled. But if I was right and did nothing, everyone in this room could die. I glanced at my screen at the blinking cursor, waiting for my answer. My fingers moved. The threat is not in the examination hall. It is in the observation room and the ventilation system. This is not a test. This is real. I hit submit and stood up. Everyone needs to evacuate. Now. 50 faces turned toward me like I'd lost my mind. Torres laughed. Sit down, Chen. You're going to get us all disqualified. The ventilation system, I said louder. Listen to it. The room went quiet, and in that silence, the whine became unmistakable. Several cadets' faces went pale. That's when Arya moved. She was faster than any human could be. She lunged across 3 rows of seats and slammed her palm against the emergency lockdown panel near the door. Red lights flooded the room. The main door sealed shut with a hiss. What are you doing? Someone screamed. Arya's voice cut through the panic, clear and commanding, with a melodic accent that marked her alien origins. The door is compromised. If you open it, you trigger the device. She turned to face the room, and I saw her fully for the first time, not as the quiet outsider, but as someone who'd been trained for exactly this moment. Marcus is correct. There is a hostile in the observation room. They've planted a bioweapon in the ventilation system and rigged the exits. If we run, we die. If we stay, we die slower. The observation window suddenly shattered. The figure in black emerged, weapon raised, and I finally understood. This wasn't part of any exam. This was an assassination attempt. You should have minded your own business, human, the attacker said, voice distorted by a modulator. This was supposed to look like an accident. Now it's just going to look like a tragedy. They aimed at me first. I didn't even have time to move, but Arya did. She crossed the space between us in a blur, her hand coming up in a gesture I'd never seen before. The air around her seemed to shimmer, like heat waves over summer pavement, and the energy bolt from the attacker's weapon simply stopped, hung in midair, then dissipated. Impossible, the attacker hissed. Your kind can't use atmospheric manipulation without our people knowing? Arya finished, and her voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. I'm not here as a student. I'm here as a guardian. Did you really think the Sovereign Collective would send our youth to your world unprotected? Her eyes began to glow softly, an ethereal blue light that seemed to come from within. I am Arya of the 7th Fleet, and you've just attacked those under my protection. What happened next, I can barely describe. The air in the room began to move, not like wind, but like something alive. Arya raised both hands, and the attacker's weapon tore from their grip, clattering uselessly to the floor. The ventilation system groaned, then reversed, pulling the bioweapon back into its containment before it could spread. And through it all, Arya stood perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, like she was conducting an orchestra. Only she could hear. The attacker made one last desperate move, pulling a blade and lunging forward. I moved on instinct, grabbing a chair and swinging it into their path. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't trained, but it was enough to throw off their trajectory. Arya's hand touched their shoulder almost gently, and they collapsed unconscious before they hit the ground. Then silence. Absolute silence. Arya swayed slightly, the glow fading from her eyes, and I caught her elbow as she stumbled. Easy, I said softly. You're okay. We're okay. She looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she smiled. A real smile. Warm and slightly embarrassed. I'm not supposed to reveal my abilities, she said quietly. This is going to be so much paperwork. Despite everything, the danger, the fear, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I laughed. Actually laughed. You just saved 50 lives. I think they'll forgive the paperwork. Security forces burst through the secondary entrance moments later, but by then, Arya had already secured the attacker and neutralized the bioweapon. The investigation that followed revealed a conspiracy that reached deep into the Academy's administration. Extremists who believed aliens and humans should never mix, never trust each other, never build something better together. They'd rigged the exam as cover for eliminating the integration problem. They'd counted on prejudice, on fear, on everyone doing exactly what they'd been trained to do, identify the alien as the threat. 3 days later, I found Arya on the Academy's observation deck, staring out at the stars that had once been her home. I heard you got top marks on the exam, she said, without turning around. You and I were the only ones who identified the real threat. You knew from the beginning, I said, moving to stand beside her. Why didn't you say something sooner? She was quiet for a moment, her reflection ghostly in the transparent aluminum. Because I needed to know if any of you would see past what I am. If any of you would look deeper. She finally turned to face me, and in the starlight, she was breathtaking not because of her features or her luminescent skin, but because of the vulnerability in her eyes. 47 cadets submitted that I was the threat. 3 submitted incomplete answers. Only you saw the truth. I felt something tighten in my chest. I almost didn't. For a minute there, I almost went with the obvious answer. But you didn't, she said, and her hand found mine. Her touch was warm, more human than alien in that moment. You chose to look closer. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? I turned my hand to properly hold hers, our fingers intertwining. So what happens now? You're not really a student, she smiled, that same slightly embarrassed expression from before. I am a student. I'm just also a guardian. My people sent me here to learn about humanity, to see if we could truly be allies. I was starting to think the answer was no, that the divide was too great. She squeezed my hand. Thank you for proving me wrong, Marcus Chen, Arya, I said, the name feeling different on my tongue now, weighted with meaning. That thing you said when you stopped the attacker, about those under your protection. Did you mean it? The stars reflected in her eyes like distant promises. I've been trained since childhood to manipulate atmospheric pressure, to read the subtle signs that others miss, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. But until 3 days ago, it was just duty. Just protocol. She stepped closer, and I could see the faint pattern of light that moved beneath her skin when she was emotional. When I saw that weapon aimed at you, when I thought I might be too late, I understood the difference between guarding someone and caring for someone. My heart was pounding harder than it had during the attack. I've been wanting to talk to you for months, I admitted, but you always seemed so distant, so unreachable. I was afraid, she said simply. Afraid that you'd see me as a weapon first and a person second. That everyone would. She laughed softly, the sound like music. Turns out, revealing myself as an atmospheric manipulator who can disable weapons and control air pressure didn't help with the I'm totally normal impression I was going for. Normal is overrated, I said. And I meant it. You're brilliant and brave, and you saved everyone in that room. That's not normal. That's extraordinary. The observation deck's automated systems dimmed the interior lights for optimal star viewing, leaving us in a bubble of near darkness surrounded by infinite light. My people have a saying, Arya said quietly. Trust is the first atmosphere we breathe together. It means that before we can share the same air, the same space, the same future, we must first share trust. I trust you, I said, and the words felt like a vow. I trust you, she echoed, and then she did something that surprised me. She pressed her forehead gently to mine, her silver hair falling around us like a curtain. In my culture, this is how we show connection. Heart to heart, mind to mind, breath to breath. I could feel the warmth of her skin, smell something like ozone and flowers that must have been uniquely her. In my culture, I said softly, we'd probably go for coffee and awkwardly talk about the weather. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, and she was grinning. Marcus Chen, are you asking me on a date? I just watched you catch an energy bolt in midair and reverse a bioweapon dispersal system. I'd be an idiot not to. Her laugh was genuine and joyful, and in that moment, I saw our future unfold in possibilities. Late-night study sessions where she'd help me understand xenobiology and I'd help her with Earth history. Missions where we'd watch each other's backs. Quiet moments like this, where the galaxy felt small enough to hold in our joined hands. Coffee sounds perfect, she said. But I should warn you, atmospheric manipulators have a terrible reputation for stealing the foam off cappuccinos from across the room. I'll risk it. We stood there together, human and alien, looking out at the stars that had brought us together. The exam had asked us to identify the threat, and most had failed because they'd been looking for the wrong thing. They'd been looking for what was different, what was other, what was easy to blame. But the real threat had always been the same: fear, prejudice, the inability to see past the surface. Arya's people had sent her as a test, just as much as she was being tested. And maybe, just maybe, we'd all pass something more important than any exam. Hey, Arya, I said, as we finally turned to leave the observation deck. Yeah, thank you for sitting in row 3. She tilted her head, puzzled. Why row 3 specifically? Because if you'd been in row 1, I might not have had time to really see you. To see past the obvious answer, I smiled. Sometimes the best things in life are sitting in row 3, waiting for someone to look close enough to notice. She squeezed my hand again, and we walked together down the corridor. Two cadets who'd survived an exam that had never been about tactics or training. It had been about choice. About choosing to see potential instead of threat, connection instead of division, trust instead of fear. Behind us, through the observation deck windows, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of young people learning to bridge impossible distances. But ahead of us, the path was our own to make. The academy's evening shift was beginning, and somewhere in the administrative offices, reports were being filed about the attack, the conspiracy, the breach of protocol. There would be hearings and investigations and probably some very uncomfortable questions about why a guardian had been embedded without full disclosure. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I walked through the halls with an extraordinary person who'd chosen to protect me, to trust me, to see in humanity something worth saving, despite all evidence to the contrary. My communicator buzzed. A message from the Academy Commandant, Cadet Chen, Cadet Arya, report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. You're not in trouble. You're being reassigned. Congratulations on passing the only exam that ever truly mattered. I showed the message to Arya. She read it, her brow furrowing slightly. Reassigned to what, do you think? Knowing our luck? Probably something dangerous and impossible. Sounds perfect, she said, and her smile was radiant. As long as I don't have to sit in row 3 again. I prefer being closer to the action. Noted. Front row seats from now on. Partners? She asked, and the word hung between us with layers of meaning. Partners, I agreed. And as we walked into whatever future awaited us, human and alien, student and guardian, two people who'd chosen to look past the obvious answer, I realized that sometimes the best outcomes come from the tests we never saw coming. From the moments that force us to question everything we thought we knew. From the person sitting quietly in row 3, who turns out to be exactly what we needed all along.